Hey, my guy. Hey, my main man. Yo! Yo! Screenshots. You gotta pull it up. 3 matches remain in the URC this season, or the Vodacom URC if you prefer to live a sponsored life. The quarterfinals were wrapped up this weekend gone by. In 4 out of 4 matches, the home team won. In 3 out of those 4 matches, the home team won convincingly. The Bulls, the only side that were within touching distance of their opposition come the final whistle of their quarterfinal, and they'll be looking to improve their form, that's for sure, heading into the semi-final. Time is ticking away, though, not much time to tinker, and the sides that are coming to face these that have won their semi-finals, those being the Bulls and Munster, who'll be hosting their semi-finals, the sides who have won the quarterfinals, are formidable. The Bulls will be hosting Leinster, a powerhouse not in the URC competition, but dating before the URC competition, perennial victors of the Pro 14, the Pro 12, and the Celtic League going back. Of course, they've risen in strength recently, and they, form the majority of the Irish side, plays for Leinster, and it's a symbiotic relationship, shall we say. So, let's look through the matches individually. Munster looking dominant against the Ospreys, winning by 23 points to 7 on home turf, which they will retain all the way through to the final, should they win their semi which will be against the Glasgow Warriors of Scotland. Now, Munster in this match looking controlled, looking poised, looking structured, but not looking expensive, not looking to break out of the mold, while the Ospreys were looking to break down that mold, knowing that they were the underdogs coming into this one, having pulled off a miracle, to be honest, to get into the playoffs to begin with, finishing in 11th position and moving all the way up to 8th, finishing in 11th position in round 17, to be clear, and moving all the way up to 8th in round 18, knocking out the Lions, who potentially were going to be in the quarterfinals for the very first time until Ospreys played that match after the Lions concluded theirs, narrowly losing against the Stormers, did the Lions in round 18, and opening the door to the Welsh side to come into the playoffs. And come into the playoffs they did, only to be played out immediately by Munster, unsurprisingly so. Still, a great season for the Ospreys, and they will be proud that they did end up making the playoffs, and they did have one Welsh representative in those playoffs as opposed to 0. Munster looking formidable. The likelihood that they will beat Glasgow on home turf, very high, very high. But Glasgow could get anything done this season. They have impressed home and away. The last few matches away in South Africa when the pressure was on, not as impressive as some of the rest of their season has been, but they still kept those ones competitive. However, heading over to Munster, Munster will have so much inspiration to get over the line in this match to host the final for the prestige, for the income as well, to be clear, for the bums in seats. Now, also, the privilege of hosting a final in Ireland for the first time, both of the previous finals having been held in South Africa, in Cape Town to be specific. And Munster will be keen to make sure that they don't slip up and allow the possibility of the Bulls hosting the final should things fall in their favour. So the Ospreys scoring one brilliant expensive try, but Munster generally in control of that match. More importantly, they march on to the semi-finals. The Bulls were the first team to play on Saturday, an early afternoon kickoff, and they overcame Benetton Rugby by 30 points to 23. Not quite the skin of their teeth, but somewhat the skin of their teeth. Watch the match. Benetton bang on the door towards the end of the match. Had the opportunity to turn it into a drawn game and take it into extra time. However, just couldn't get that job done. And in the end, the Bulls sneaking away with the victory. And they'll need to improve their form drastically in order to make sure that they don't sneak through this next one. But sneaking through would be enough. Sneaking through would be enough to get to the final, which will most likely be held at Thomond Park in Ireland, but we'll see what happens between Munster and the Glasgow Warriors. The Bulls, they'll be happy with that 30-23 win. However, what they won't be happy with was seeing their double try scorer and Springbok wing, Kurtley Arendse, going off the field with injury in what turned out to be a cheek injury, a fracture, I believe, which is going to see Kurt the Ardenser unavailable for the rest of the playoff rounds, and that's going to be a big blow for the side from Pretoria. To be sure, having already lost Kanan Moody, started this match with Sebastian de Klerk on the wing, and that proved to be consequential as Ratave ran right over him on more than one occasion and caused real problems for the replacement wing. Real quality player Sebastian de Klerk, extremely quick especially. However, clearly he's been identified as having some defensive deficiencies, and Benetton were hanging up the high balls on de Klerk as well as having Ratave run at him one-on-one, creating 2 try-scoring opportunities at least. Ratave did score in the corner eventually, but he had a try disallowed, rightfully so, through an earlier infringement where Ruzo was reaching through the ruck and not properly bound, charged down Papier's attempted clearance kick or contestable kick, which led to the try. However, there was another one which would have been perfectly legitimate a few moments later, where the inside ball from Ratave was gobbled and the try was squandered, which could have been a real difference maker in the game. On a couple of occasions, Benetton slipping in the basics, which took away the possibility for victory from them. There were moments in which they looked like the better team in that match, but the Bulls, in the end, on home turf, holding on, and as a result, they will have the privilege of hosting their semi-final, having finished second on the log in the final reckoning. Looking at Leinster now, they hosted Ulster in the most dominant display of the entire quarterfinals, to be clear. Leinster, having lost to Ulster, I believe twice in league play this season, really got their own back as they won by 43 points to 20. It was always in the hands of Leinster, known to be the dominant side in Ireland, playing against their fellow Irishmen of Ulster, knowing that Munster are also in the knockout stages. So a great showing for Ireland in this year's competition, which will stand them in good stead going into the international window, and they'll be hoping to get a series victory over the reigning world champions, the Springboks, in July. But that's going to be a tall order in itself. So, Leinster by 43 points to 20. Ulster never really in the game, peppered in a couple of tries throughout, but never really looked like being able to compete with the lead that Leinster had built up, who scored throughout the match and in the end stretched the lead out to those 43 points, with Ulster scoring basically consolations throughout. And Leinster, rightfully so, into those knockouts. After the painful loss in the Champions Cup final yet again, they'll be looking to put some polish on their season and lift this URC trophy for the first time, a trophy which surely they would have been expecting to win at least once in their first 3 seasons, having been so utterly dominant in Irish and Pro 14 rugby up until the creation of the URC. And all of a sudden, a couple of results, especially in the first season when they were marching on to the home final, I believe. And then the Bulls came and knocked them over in an away match, only to go and contest the final against the Stormers and lose out. So Leinster will be looking to return the favour here, win the match against the Bulls, and then, hopefully for them, they will be travelling to Munster's home, Thomond Park, for an all-Irish final on Irish turf. Although it won't be on their home turf, it would make a big difference for Leinster, you'd have to feel, and it would be a victory for Irish rugby in and of itself. What could happen, of course, is that the Glasgow Warriors end up beating Munster, and then Leinster would have the privilege of hosting the final, which I'm sure they wouldn't mind at all. So, going to the final of the 4 quarterfinals, Glasgow Warriors 27 points to the 10 points of the Stormers. The Stormers, disappointing on the road throughout the 3 years of this competition thus far, really, had a good couple of results towards the end of the league stage when they had to go overseas and win to get themselves or to secure their spot in the playoffs. And they did win those crucial matches, leading some to believe they may have turned their form around on their travels. However, it was proven to be not the case, as the Glasgow Warriors were just much more clinical in their defeat of the Stormers. The match was on a knife's edge towards the final few minutes, to be clear. The Stormers striking back through Paul de Vet to bring it back into the balance. However, Glasgow scored 2 late tries, which took the match away from the Cape Tonians, and a couple of misses from the tee, proving costly for the Cape side. However, they would have been looking to be more clinical in all areas, to score more tries and to stop the Glasgow Warriors, to be the dominant side, as has been their want when they really have been on full form in this competition. But mostly we've seen that form at home in front of the vociferous fans of the Stormers, and without those fans there, it proved to be a bridge too far. On the positive side, for those Stormers players that didn't make it into the semi-finals of the competition, that has made them available for selection in the match between the Springboks and Wales that's going to be before the international window starts, an exhibition match between the Springboks and Wales at Twickenham. That match between the Springboks and Wales is going to be on the same weekend as the final of the Vodacom URC. Of course, the times won't clash. It's just going to be an interesting rugby occurrence to have such a big international match happening on the same weekend as such a big franchise match. But of course, not all of the Springboks will be available for that match. It's going to be a big celebration of rugby in England after, of course, the finals of their season have already concluded as well. All the finals of the European rugby and, of course, Super Rugby all coming to an end now in time for the international windows, which should be very, very interesting to see. All these new squads post-World Cup, who's still around, who's not, how are they looking to rebuild, new coaches in place as well. They're going to be keeping an eye on the international window in a few weeks' time. Looking forward to that very much so. But for now, the semi-finals of the URC are coming up, and to reiterate, those are going to be the Bulls taking on Leinster. The Bulls hosting. That match will be taking place in South Africa, in Pretoria. Should the Bulls end up hosting the final, by the way, they probably won't be able to host it at Loftus Versfeld due to the formalities that will be taking place following the national elections here. It's happened to them before when they were meant to host a Super Rugby final and had to move venues. They ended up moving to play that match in Soweto at Orlando Stadium, and that was a cultural event of note. Unforgettable scenes when that happened. So South African fans will be hoping for a repeat, but in order to see that happen, we would have to see Munster lose their semi-final to the Glasgow Warriors. Do Glasgow have enough in the tank to get the job done against Munster? You would have to feel that they are being written off a little bit at this point, Munster being the reigning champions and being on good form as well, and the Glasgow Warriors having been shaky away from home. But Franco Smith and the boys will know this is it. This is do or die. How often do they get the chance to get themselves into the final of such a prestigious competition? How many times have Glasgow Warriors lifted either the Celtic Cup or the Pro 14? Going to have to go back into the record books and check that out. But it hasn't been a story of success so much for the Scottish and the Irish sides, the Scottish and the Italian sides and the Welsh sides, as it has been for the Irish sides. All of this conglomeration of the European rugby nations, because of course Italy used to play in its own domestic cup previously, and there were different setups for each and every one of these nations before the Celtic League, the Pro 12, the Pro 14, and now the URC came about. So if Glasgow Warriors could get themselves into the final and just keep believing, they would then have to be travelling either away to the Bulls or to Leinster, because Glasgow finished fourth, so there's no chance of them anymore hosting the final of the competition, seeing as all four of the top four teams have made it through to the final four. And now the unpredictability may well begin. And of course, that's what every competition really wants, is unpredictability, the most elusive and desired feature of any sporting competition is unpredictability. And that was very much the case throughout the league stage of this competition. Heading into the rounds 16, 17, and 18, so much change in the top 8. That race for the 8 was alive and well, and the race for the top 4 at the same time as well, eventually separating themselves from the teams through 5 through 8, and then the top 4 between each other, trying to figure out who would finish top of the log. How many points were between them in the end? Like 3 or 4. Could have been anybody. But they held their positions in that final round. The Bulls finished in second, meant that they hosted their quarter, hosting their semi, and they'll find out about the final should they be able to get over the line against Leinster. That's the match to watch, match of the weekend, no question about it. Have Leinster risen back to such quality form that they can travel down to South Africa and knock over the Bulls on home turf there at Loftus, in the elevation of the Highveld as well? Oh, it's going to be intriguing. Never mind the fact that Munster against Glasgow. Glasgow are going to have it all to do in that one, and they're going to put their bodies on the line. Do Munster have the quality to keep Glasgow out? If they end up losing that match to Glasgow and Bulls host the final, they'll be tearing their hair out about missing out on the possibility of hosting a final in Ireland, not just for their sakes, but for the whole nation. I would believe they must be frustrated to watch this continued blessed existence of South African sides in franchise and international rugby, winning the World Cup again, winning the URC, hosting the next URC final. It's a South African celebration over these last few years of rugby. And as a South African fan, of course, it's wonderful to see. It would be great to see the Bulls host a final in the end, just for humor's sake, even just to see the absolute upset and heartbreak, which is such a great feature of playoff rugby and playoff sport in general. This is what it's all about. We want to see upsets, and let's see if we get any from this weekend's action in the semi-finals of the URC. 2 weekends left in the competition. Don't miss a second, and I'll speak to you next week. Playoffs? You're talking to me about playoffs? Playoffs? We are growing higher and higher. We are growing higher and higher.